Wyoming Territory, August 1883. The sunset burned gold over the hills when Genevieve Ellison ran. Her boots pounded dry dirt, skirts snagging on rabbit brush, lungs tight from the thinner mountain air. Behind her, the town of Casper shrank with each step. She did not look back. Not at the train station. Not at the man she had just left gasping on the floor of his railcar office, the tycoon who had bought her name, her freedom, and for too long, her hope. Genevieve's hands trembled, the bruises still fresh on her wrists. But her eyes stayed sharp. She had one chance. She had planned this for weeks, down to the hour the tycoon would be counting his silver, down to the rancher she had heard about through whispered talk in the kitchens, the cowboy who refused to sell his land, who had punched a banker once for cheating an old widow. His name was Osiah Lark. She had memorized the direction northwest, following the rise of the hills. She did not know what she would say when she found him. She only knew she had to get there before dark. And that if she did not, the tycoon would send men. The sun dipped low by the time she saw the cattle fencing in the distance. A dog barked. A figure stood at the corral, tall, broad-shouldered, a rifle slung across his back. He turned at the sound of her approach, his face shadowed under a wide-brimmed hat. Genevieve stopped, breath ragged. "Are you Osiah Lark?" He nodded once, stepping forward. "Who wants to know?" "I need help," she said, voice thin and dry. "He's going to come after me." "I escaped." Osiah studied her, eyes dark and steady. "You hurt?" She shook her head, though her ribs ached. "Not bad. Just please. I need to stay ahead of him." Osiah looked past her shoulder, out toward the open land. He saw no riders yet. But he also saw the fear in her eyes and the fire behind it. He opened the gate. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "You tell me the rest when you are ready." Genevieve's knees almost buckled, but she nodded, stepping through. Inside the bunkhouse, he lit a lamp and handed her a blanket. "Name?" "Genevieve Ellison." He paused. "The rail magnate's companion?" She flinched. "Not anymore." Osiah did not press. He tossed a log into the stove. "You eat yet?" "No, I will fix something." She sat at the small table, her hands finally still. He moved with quiet precision, frying beans and cornbread, filling a tin cup with water from a barrel. He set it in front of her. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded again, silent. That night, she lay on a cot in the corner. Outside, crickets sang low, and the dog barked once before settling. Osiah sat on the porch, rifle on his knee, watching the dark. The next morning, Genevieve woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She sat up, realizing she had not slept that deep in years. Osiah poured her coffee without asking. "No riders last night," he said. "He will not give up," she told him. "I figured." She looked at him fully now. His face was sun-browned, with a scar along his jaw, like he had taken a blade there years back. His eyes held something steady and kind beneath the grit. She had not expected kindness. "I cannot stay long," she said, voice low. "He will find me." "You have a horse?" She shook her head. Osiah looked toward the barn. "I can spare one. I will ride with you." "You picked a direction yet?" "No." He finished his coffee. "Then you might as well stay until you do." They rode out later that day to check the cattle. Genevieve borrowed a hat and a pair of old gloves. The sun was hot on her back, but the ride steadied her nerves. Osiah spoke little, but when he did, it mattered. "You were with him long?" 18 months. He looked at her. "He hurt you?" "Yes." He nodded, jaw tight. She watched him throughout the day, how he guided the horses, how he calmed a skittish calf with a soft murmur and a touch to the neck. He was not like the men she had known in the tycoon's world, greedy, cruel, always watching for weakness. That night, after supper, she sat on the porch beside him. The stars were out. For the first time, she felt like she could breathe. "I used to think I would marry someone like you," she said softly. Osiah glanced over. Someone like me? A man who works with his hands. Who does not lie. He was quiet for a moment. I am not much good at talking. I do not need talk. He looked at her then, and something passed between them, not fire, not yet. But warmth. Steady and quiet. 3 days passed. She helped around the ranch, feeding hens, mending a fence with borrowed tools. She smiled more. He noticed. On the 4th morning, they found the first rider, a hired man from the Tycoon's rail company, scouting. Genevieve froze when she saw the man's coat. Osiah lifted his rifle and fired a warning shot. The man turned and rode hard. You will not be safe here much longer, Osiah said that night as they packed a small satchel. I know. I will go with you, he said. Wherever you end up. She stared at him, breath caught. Why? He shrugged. I have land, but no one to share it with. You came here scared. But you stayed. You are braver than most. Her voice wavered. I do not know what comes next. We will figure it out. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing his. You are a good man, Osiah Lark. He caught her hand gently in his thumb tracing her knuckles. And you are a strong woman, Genevieve Ellison. They left at dawn, heading west, toward the Wind River Range. He taught her how to ride longer days, how to read the land. She learned fast. One night by the fire, she looked at him and saw something in his eyes, something he had not said, but always showed. I trust you, she said. I will not ever give you a reason not to, he answered. She kissed him then, slow, sure. And when he kissed her back, she felt the last of her fear melt into dust. They crossed into the foothills of the Wind River Range beneath skies pressed low with late summer heat. The trail narrowed between groves of quaking aspen and sheer rock shelves, horse hooves clinking against stone. Osiah led, reins loose in one hand, the other resting on his thigh. Genevieve rode behind, her gaze steady, her posture more sure than it had been days before. A pine squirrel darted across the trail. Her mare flinched. She caught the reins tighter and eased the animal back into calm. You learn quick, Osiah said, not glancing back. I had to, she answered. They made camp by a stream that evening, the water running cold and swift over silt and smooth stones. Osiah built the fire low, his movements practiced but unhurried. Genevieve gathered fallen pine limbs without being asked. She rubbed her hands together once she set the last bundle down. Tell me something, she said. Why didn't you sell when the others did? Osiah tossed a branch into the flames. My father carved that land out of nothing. Put his back into it every day until it killed him. Nobody's silver paper is worth more than that. Her eyes searched his face. You don't miss town? Company? I get by. And yet you didn't let me ride off alone. He looked at her then, his expression unreadable for a moment. You didn't look like someone who should be alone. She didn't respond right away. The fire crackled between them, and the wind shifted through the trees. Eventually she said, he had a way of making you think you owed him. Even after everything. I still feel it, like a hand on the back of my neck. Osiah leaned forward, stoking the coals. That'll pass. How do you know? Because you're already standing straighter than when I first saw you. She stared at the flames, shoulders drawn back. When did you know you were meant to be out here? Living like this? Right after the war, he said. Didn't take well to noise after that. Couldn't sleep in walls. So I left Missouri. Rode west until I found land that didn't talk so loud. She nodded slowly. I was born in Baltimore. Never saw land stretch out for days like this before. You miss it? I miss knowing what came next. She hesitated, then added, but I don't miss who I was there. He tossed a pine cone into the fire and watched it crackle. You get to decide who you are now. Their fingers brushed when she handed him a piece of jerky. Neither pulled away. They rose early the next morning. Thunderheads loomed along the peaks, but the air stayed dry. Osiah pointed them south, tracing old wagon paths nearly overtaken by sage and grass. They rode until the sun sat high and the horses needed rest. They stopped near a thicket of cottonwoods by a shallow pond. Osiah led the horses to water while Genevieve sat on a down log, boots muddy, hat low. "I keep thinking he'll come riding up over the hill," she said when Osiah returned. "He might," he admitted. "But he won't catch us unready." She turned to him. "What if he sends someone who doesn't ask questions? Just draws a gun. Then I'll draw first." She watched him, lips pressed. "I don't want anyone dying over me. I don't aim to die. And I sure as hell won't let him take you back." Silence stretched between them again, not uncomfortable now, but weighty. "I never knew a man who didn't want something from me," she said. "Not until you." He crouched beside her, resting his arms on his knees. "I want something. But it's not what you think." She tilted her head, waiting. "I want to see what kind of woman you become when nobody's pressing you into the shape they want." She blinked once, and then again. "I wouldn't know how to be that woman. Not yet. But you're starting." They camped that night in a narrow draw, windless and warm, stars thick above them. She drifted asleep near the fire while he kept watch, rifle across his lap, eyes on the trail behind. In the morning, she woke to the smell of juniper smoke and a sky streaked with coral light. He handed her a strip of bacon and a half-burned biscuit, and for the first time in years, she laughed, quiet and short, but real. They continued on, deeper into the high country. The terrain grew steeper, the trees denser. When they came upon an abandoned trapper's cabin, half fallen but dry inside, Osiah paused. "Could fix it up," he said. "Roof needs patching. Door's still good." She stepped over the threshold, eyes adjusting to the dim. "You thinking of staying here?" "I'm thinking it's a place no one would come looking." She ran her fingers over a beam. "I've never had a place that was mine." "You could," he said. "If you wanted." She turned to face him fully. "I don't want to keep running." "Then we stop." Her breath caught, but she didn't pull away when he stepped close. "I don't think I could leave you behind now, Genevieve. I don't think I want you to." He touched her cheek, rough thumb brushing the edge of her jaw. She leaned into the warmth, eyes closing. That night, they lay beneath patched shingles and a borrowed quilt, listening to the wind ease through the trees. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. By September, the cabin stood solid against the wind, with a new roof made from peeled lodgepole pine and a stone hearth Osiah built by hand. The work had been slow, each day measured by what they could carry or cut. Genevieve hauled water from the creek, laid daub in the chinks, and coaxed wild yeast into bread that sometimes rose. Her palms hardened, her stride lengthened. She no longer hesitated before speaking. One morning, a bull elk called deep in the trees, and Genevieve stepped outside with her shawl drawn close, watching the mist burn off the meadow. Osiah was already splitting wood, his shirt damp at the collar, axe biting clean. "The sound that thing makes," she said. "Like it belongs to another world." He paused and leaned on the handle. "You get used to it. Come winter you'll hear them less. Then it's quiet enough to hear your own bones shift. I think I'd like that." He nodded once, then returned to the swing, rhythm steady. She stayed, watching the breath of the trees and the way the sun moved slow over his shoulders. Later that day, while she repaired a broken bootlace near the hearth, he came in with a folded paper, edges curled from his pocket. "Found this caught against the fence," he said. "Must have blown in from a rider." She took it. The page was torn from a broadsheet Cheyenne or Denver, the print smudged. Her eyes caught the headline. "Rail magnate declares reward for return of missing companion. Says she was taken." Osiah crouched beside her, watching her face. "I left of my own will," she said. "He'll twist that until it fits his shape. He's not fooling me." She turned the paper over, silent a moment. "If someone comes this far, they'll be desperate," she said. "We're not moving again," he said. "We've got walls now." She didn't answer at once. Then, I want to stay. But I don't want to be the reason you end up shot on your own land. I decide what's worth the risk. When she looked up, her hands were still. And I'm worth that? You are. He hadn't said anything like it before, not in words. She felt the truth of it settle low in her chest, like a seed planted deep. That night, after supper, she rubbed linseed into the dry leather of her boots while Osiah finished carving notches into a fence rail. He was teaching her to use the draw knife, but tonight she only watched. You ever been in love before? She asked. He didn't look away from his work. Thought I was. Once. Back before the war. But I was too young to know the difference between comfort and love. What happened with her? She married someone else while I was still wearing blue. Genevieve folded her hands in her lap. Did it break you? No. But it made me slower to believe. That's not always a bad thing. She nodded, then stood and crossed to the window. The moon was rising, pale and sharp over the pines. I used to think love would feel like being held too tight, she said. Like pressure I had to survive. And now? Now it feels like I can stand as I am, and still be seen. He set the draw knife down. That's what it's meant to be. They went to bed early, the cold coming in fast. He pulled the quilt up to her shoulders and didn't speak, but she knew by the way his hand lingered on her back that something had shifted between them, something final and quiet as snowfall. The next morning brought frost on the grass and a mule deer grazing near the fence, unbothered. Genevieve poured water into the wash basin and caught her reflection in the ripples, cheeks windburned, hair braided back, eyes clear. Osiah stepped in behind her and filled the doorway. I was thinking, he said, about building a smokehouse. If we're staying through winter, we'll need to keep meat longer. I'll help. He studied her a moment. You don't mind the thought of being snowed in with me? She dried her hands on a cloth. Not if you keep making that rabbit stew. He laughed low, the sound warm. The days shortened. They gathered dried berries, sealed jars with wax, trapped what they could. When the first snow came light and quick, Genevieve stood outside with her face tilted up, eyes closed. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Inside, Osiah lit a fire and set a pot to boil. She brought in the last of the kindling, shaking snow from her shoulders. I never thought I'd be glad to see winter come, she said. It slows everything down. Makes it easier to know what matters. She crossed to him, her fingers finding his. I know what matters. He didn't answer, only leaned in and kissed her, slow and certain. No hesitation, no asking. The kind of kiss that made promises without a single word. That night, the wind howled outside, but the cabin held. The fire burned low. She lay beside him, her hand resting over his heart. You're not afraid anymore, he said. I'm not alone anymore, she answered. And outside, the snow kept falling. By late October, the ground held its frost past midday. The days narrowed into pale stretches of sun, and Genevieve had grown used to the way the cold made her breath rise like smoke. She stuffed wool into the doorframe gaps and lined the hearth with pine cones to dry. Osiah spent the mornings checking the traplines and came back with his beard rimmed in ice and his voice quiet from the stillness of the forest. One afternoon, they sat across from each other at the table, the light slanting low through the narrow window. She was darning the heel of a wool sock, her needle slow and even. He was shaping a new handle for a broken hatchet. Were you ever close with your mother? She asked without looking up. He turned the wood over in his hand. She died the spring I turned 15. Fever took her in 2 days. Genevieve nodded, setting a stitch. Mine lingered. Consumption. All the way down to bone by the end. She the one taught you to sew? No. That was the woman who took me in after. Mrs. Caro. Ran a boarding house near the docks. She made us earn our keep. He set the handle aside. You miss her? She was hard, but never cruel. That alone made her kind, in my eyes. A gust rattled the shutters. He stood to tend the fire, and she watched the way he moved, efficient, measured, never rushed. There was something in him that steadied her, the way heavy stones steadied a creek. "Osiah," she said, quieter now, "do you ever think about what comes after this winter?" He replaced the kettle on the iron hook. "I do. And I'd build another room onto this place. Enough space for a table where two people can sit without knocking knees. A porch with a roof good enough to keep off the rain." She smiled faintly. "You think about details. If I'm going to ask you to stay, I ought to think about how to make it a life." She set the sock down and stood. "You haven't asked?" He met her eyes. "I was waiting until it wasn't just safety keeping you here." Genevieve crossed to him, close enough to feel the warmth off his skin. "It isn't." He didn't speak. He didn't need to. That night, as the wind pushed low against the walls, they slept wrapped in the same quilt, his arm tucked beneath her ribs, her cheek resting above the beat of his heart. The next morning, they tracked a fox print near the hen coop, but nothing was taken. She scattered feed while he checked the latch. "You ever want children?" she asked, brushing grain from her hands. He didn't answer right away. "Always figured if it happened, I'd learn as I went." "I think you'd be good with them," she said. "You listen more than you talk." He glanced at her. "You ever think on it much? I used to think I wouldn't live long enough. Or that I'd be too bitter to raise anyone right." She paused, looking toward the tree-line. "But I think I've got more to give than I thought." He reached down and touched her wrist, fingers light. "You've got patience. That's rarer than most folks think." They spent the rest of the day reinforcing the smokehouse walls with fresh clay and bark. She carried the bucket while he packed it in with a flat board. Their shadows stretched long by the time the sun dipped behind the ridge. Inside, as she washed her hands, she caught sight of her reflection in the basin water. The sharpness had left her eyes. What remained was something deeper rooted. "There's a letter I never sent," she said, drying her hands on her apron. "To the man I used to belong to." Osiah looked up from the table. "What did it say?" "That he didn't break me. That I walked away with more of myself than he ever held." He nodded once. "That true now?" She folded the cloth, set it aside. "It is." Later, she found Osiah leaning against the doorframe, watching the stars. "Moon'll be full in a few nights," he said. "Makes the timber easier to work by. We could cut for that porch roof." He smiled, soft and fleeting. "I was thinking more about carving a cradle." She stepped into him, wrapped her arms around his waist. "Then I'll start saving scraps for quilts." The wind shifted. The trees sighed. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low and steady, and nothing waited for them beyond the ridge that they hadn't chosen. The first real snow came in the night, heavy and soundless, blanketing the roof with a weight that quieted the world. When Genevieve stepped outside at dawn, the snow reached past her ankles, clean and untouched except where Osiah's boot tracks cut a path to the barn. She followed them, scarf snug against her chin, breath curling in the cold. Osiah stood brushing down the mare, his sleeves damp, steam rising off the horse's back. "The roof's holding," he said without turning. "No drips inside." She reached for the rake beside the door and began clearing snow from the eaves. "The hens haven't stirred. They're smarter than us." He glanced at her and smiled, faint but warm. "You sleep all right? I dreamed we were planting potatoes. You were arguing with a crow over the field." He gave a low laugh. "Did I win?" "No. It flew off with your hat." That evening she spread a worn map across the table, tracing the lines of distant towns. Her finger paused at a name near the bottom edge. "Lander," she said. "There's a dry goods store there. And a school." Osiah leaned over her shoulder. "You thinking of teaching?" "I'm thinking someone should. I never had much schooling, but I can read and write well enough. And I've got patience. You'd be good at it." She looked up. "If we go down in spring, we could see about registering the land. Make it official." He nodded. I'd like that. They didn't speak about the threat anymore. Weeks had passed with no sign of pursuit, no riders, no messages folded into fence lines. The storm had blanketed the trails so deep no hoofprints could reach them. Genevieve no longer flinched at distant sounds. Her hands moved with certainty, her eyes steady. One morning, while Osiah worked at a new door latch, she pulled a wrapped bundle from beneath the bed and held it out to him. "You never asked about what I took when I left him," she said. He set his hammer down and untied the cloth. Inside lay a silver brooch, a small leather-bound journal, and a folded letter, sealed and torn. "I kept them because they were mine before he was," she said. "The brooch was my mother's. The journal I bought with my first laundry wages. And the letters from my brother. He died in Kansas, before I ever came west." Osiah looked up. "You want to send something back east?" "No," she said. "I want to bury them here." He stood beside her as she dug into the frozen soil behind the cabin, beneath an old spruce. The ground was tough, but she worked until the hole was deep enough. She placed the bundle in gently, her breath shaking just once. When she stood again, Osiah wrapped her in his arms. "You've got a new beginning now," he said. That night they sat beside the fire, her head resting on his shoulder, both of them quiet. The flames danced low, casting long shadows across the floor. "Osiah," she said, "I'd like to take your name." He turned to her, brows lifted. "I know there's no preacher up here, and nothing written down. But I woke up this morning and knew. I'm yours. And you're mine." He took her hands in his, calloused fingers warm. Then it settled. Snow kept them close through the long winter. He built her a bookshelf from pine slats, and she filled it with pages copied by hand, recipes, poems, stories she remembered from the boarding house. She made curtains from an old wool blanket. He carved her a sewing box with her initials burned into the lid. Come spring, the path down the mountain cleared, and they rode to Lander. She registered the land in both their names. The clerk asked if they were wed, and Osiah said, "In every way that matters." They built the porch that summer, just as he'd promised. She planted potatoes in a patch of tilled earth behind the smokehouse. He dug a channel from the creek for irrigation, and every morning she walked along the furrow, checking for shoots. By August, her belly began to swell. Osiah noticed one evening as they shelled peas in the dusk. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded, fingers brushing his wrist. "I'm late, and I feel it changing me." He leaned in, kissed her temple. "We'll build the cradle this week." They finished it before the first frost, a sturdy pine frame lined with soft wool. She sewed small shirts from worn linen, and he reinforced the cabin door in case the wind hit harder that year. Their daughter was born just after the thaw, with the creek running high and the snow retreating into the tree line. Genevieve held her close, eyes wet, her voice low as she whispered the name they'd chosen together, Clara May Lark. Osiah cradled the child as if she were made of light. "She's got your eyes," he said. "She's got your quiet," Genevieve whispered. The weeks that followed were slow and full. Neighbors from half a day's ride came with jars of preserves and cloth diapers, and someone left a note carved into a piece of birch. "The Larks are good folks." Genevieve nailed it to the porch beam. One evening, as twilight settled, Osiah sat rocking Clara May while Genevieve leaned against the doorframe, shawl drawn around her shoulders. "Do you miss anything from before?" he asked. She looked out over the field, the fence line, the smokehouse, the cabin that no longer leaned. "No," she said. "Not one piece of it." He reached for her free hand, and she stepped into the light spilling warm from the cabin. "This life we made," she said. "I never even dared dream it." Osiah kissed her then, with the kind of depth that came only from knowing the worst had already passed. And that what lay ahead was theirs to shape, together. Inside, the fire burned low. The cradle rocked slow. And outside, spring bloomed across the land they had claimed with patience, with strength, and with love that needed no declaration, only the steady, daily work of building something that would last.